could set him free. Did the evidence of a brutal strangling put him away?
It was knotted very tightly around her neck.
Or was it a hell-bent detective honing in on an easy target?
You said you didn't see a car, you never heard a car, you never touched a car. Lo and behold, guess whose DNA is inside a dead girl's car?
Tonight, one woman's crusade to prove his innocence.
People just lost track of who was doing what.
Lost track in a high-profile murder case?
We're showing you the crime scene.
At the water's edge fishing, there's no way I could even lean out and see that there's anything going on.
Tapes the jury never saw. Even the judge now rethinking the case.
What do you think after watching that videotape?
It does make me question whether or not Mark Carver did it.
Did they catch a murderer or make one?
If Mark Carver didn't kill Ira Yarmolenko, then who did?
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Vargas.
And I'm David Muir. As we come on the air here tonight, a man sits in a North Carolina prison nearly 6 years into a life sentence for killing this young woman right here behind us tonight. But just like that hit documentary series, Making a Murderer, questions are now being raised. Is an innocent man behind bars?
Just yesterday, Mark Carver's lawyer filed a motion to have his conviction overturned to start fresh with a new trial. I've now spent hours with that man at the center who refused a plea deal, saying he wouldn't confess to something he didn't do. After tonight, will you think he did it?
Drive west from Charlotte, North Carolina on Interstate 85 and you'll cross the Catawba River. Wide and placid, it's a big draw for recreational boaters and sportsmen. In close but separate locations on the river's wooded banks, two people arrive here on the morning of May 5th, 2008. They could not be more different. One is a 20-year-old student from nearby UNC Charlotte, Ira Yarmolenko, a musician, a photographer, a poet.
We as women, as children.
An outdoorsy type who loves nature.
Ooh. She really enjoyed the beauty of nature. She tried to find it everywhere.
Pavel is Ira's brother.
Why do you think your sister drove to the river that day?
I think that she was looking for a pretty spot to take pictures at.
Ira is originally from the Ukraine, immigrating here with her family when she was just 7 years old. The other person on the river that day, 39-year-old Mark Carver. He's from just down the road in nearby Gastonia, a dirt road which bears his family name, lined with modest dwellings which house his relatives.
Carver was a very simple person. His family lived out in the country, didn't have much education, could not read very well, cannot write very well.
Unlike Ira, Mark has never been to college. In fact, he's never gone to high school. After years of working in the local cotton mills, he now spends his day here at this fishing hole on the Catawba, where he casts away his troubles, often with this man, his cousin, Neil Cassida. Robin Carver is Mark's sister-in-law.
Oh, they were together all the time when they were fishing and stuff.
What happened on that river that bright May day is as perplexing as it was violent, serving a life sentence for her murder. I recently went behind the barbed wire and concrete walls to hear his story.
Hi, Mark.
Hi.
I'm Elizabeth.
Okay.
Nice to meet you.
You too.
Why don't you have a seat?
Okay.
How long have you been in this prison, Mark?
5 years.
There is no question that what happened to Ira that day was terrible and tragic. But attorney Chris Muma, who's devoted her career to exonerating the wrongfully convicted, says Carver is also a victim.
We think Mark is innocent. And if Mark is innocent, the family has not received justice, and the true perpetrator is still out on the streets.
Muma took me out on the river to the spot where Carver and Cassida were fishing that morning.
Mark would back his truck up to down this road?
Down here.
So he didn't walk the road, he drove down.
He drove down.
And literally parked with the back of the truck right here.
He would sit on the back, the tailgate, and fish.
Cassida left around 12:30 that afternoon, leaving Carver alone. Half an hour later, two jet skiers out for a ride on the Catawba come upon a gruesome scene.
Yes, County 911.
I'm a boater on the Catawba River above the I-85 bridge.
something blue and metallic catches.
Body, her car, found 100 yards upriver from Carver's fishing hole.
The police found Ira's body right beside the driver's side of the car.
Elizabeth Leland has written extensively about the case for the Charlotte Observer. She says the bizarre crime scene posed far more questions than answers.
She wasn't raped. She wasn't robbed. There were lots of things that just didn't make sense about this case.
Among them, the odd manner of death. These 3 ligatures around her neck.
There was the very dainty little blue ribbon.
A disturbing discovery in the Catawba River, a body.
As the media descends, police begin canvassing the area for witnesses. They talk to those 2 jet skiers and to construction workers who were in the area where Ira's body was found.
We went to see if anything could be done, but it was too late. There was no movement.
And of course, they find that fisherman calmly casting for carp just downstream, Mark Carver.
And what did they tell you was happening?
They didn't tell me nothing. They just said they need to get my name and address and my fishing license. I give them to them, and then he gave them back. I shook his hand. They went up through there.
Carver is cooperative, but not very helpful. He says he neither saw nor heard anything. So police have nothing but bad news to deliver when they notify Ira's family.
A police officer came to the door.
What did he say?
He slowly walked in and told us that unfortunately they have found my sister's body and that they're very certain that it's her.
I can't fathom getting news like that.
I think all of us simply collapsed where we were, and that was it.
Days pass with no arrest. The mystery now as deep as the sorrow.
I hope that when you go home tonight, you will tell everybody that you love them. You will tell everyone that you know that you love them.
Pavel eulogizes his sister at a memorial service on campus. In the coming days, she is laid to rest, while detectives speak to those who last saw her, piecing together her final steps.
This video is to represent the timeline for Miss Irina Yarmolenko.
Detectives record this timeline video.
Ira spent the morning running errands. She went to the credit union, then she went to the Goodwill.
A security camera catches her donating several bags of clothing.
And then she went to Jackson's Java, which was a coffee shop where she worked.
It takes approximately 5 minutes and 50 seconds to drive to Jackson's Java from Goodwill.
And from there to the Catawba River is about a 19-minute drive.
This is the last documented moment of Ira's life, a grainy video of her car driving through the parking lot of a YMCA, about half a mile from the embankment where her car was found. Police study it, searching for any sign of another person with her. But the video is so unclear, police can't tell. So they pursue the theory that Ira must have met her killer out on the river.
If someone approached her that she didn't know, would she have had her defenses up?
Unfortunately for her, I think she was much more of an outgoing type of person.
The kind of person who would trust people she didn't know?
I think so, yeah.
With the search for the killer dragging on for weeks and then months, public pressure on the police to solve the crime mounts.
We were tormented by this search. We thought of it more or less constantly.
So police bring Mark Carver back in and start to do some fishing of their own.
Do you know what DNA is?
Are they about to find a murderer or make one?
Everybody was just in shock. We just couldn't believe it was happening.
Stay with us.
#2020 continues.
I'll need you to put on these gloves before going through the evidence.
On the ground floor of the Gaston County Courthouse, we find this cardboard box. Inside, the evidence from the Ira Yarmolenko crime scene, the 3 ligatures that were wrapped around her neck, a small floral bag from which one of those ligatures, a blue ribbon, had been torn.
Look at how tight that knot is.
Crime scene photos of her car on the banks of the river, all pieces of a Rubik's Cube of a case. Investigators spend 6 months working every possible lead and interviewing cooperative witnesses like Mark Carver repeatedly.
Did you see that little girl?
Anybody came there? I told him I didn't know what happened to the girl, but I went up there and helped her.
Carver and his cousin Neil Cassida both volunteered DNA samples. Meanwhile, Ira's family works the media, keeping images of the smiling student, the carefree spirit that was Ira, alive in the public's mind.
We simply did the only thing we could do, contact local media and get information out there so that possible witnesses would submit information.
Pavel, a brother who won't quit, at one point appeals directly to the killer.
I have no doubt that once you truly realize how deeply you've hurt us all, you'll have no choice but to surrender.
It is not until 7 months after the murder that investigators finally catch a break. They have a DNA match. Traces of Mark Carver's DNA in one spot on the outside of the car, above the rear driver's side door. Neil Cassida's DNA is in 2 spots, on the inside of the right passenger window and on an armrest.
What kind of DNA are we talking about?
It's DNA where skin cells have been shed, and typically it's called touch DNA.
It is not blood DNA or semen, but police think it's enough, even though the 2 cousins had no obvious motive for murder.
The question that the DNA never answered and the police never could was why these men would kill Ira Yarmolenko.
Groping for answers, police come up with a theory that Ira had somehow seen Carver and Cassida doing something so outrageous they had to kill her to keep their secret.
Their theory was that Ira was down there to photograph and caught the men doing something that they didn't want anybody to know about. And so that the men violently strangled her and pushed the car down the embankment, and that's why their DNA was found on it.
So now Mark Carver finds himself on the hot seat.
Do you know what DNA is? I found your DNA inside her car. I can explain it. Now, you didn't find mine. Oh, yeah, I did. I did. I'm yours and Neil's buddy.
My DNA ain't in that car.
How much money do you want?
I bet you $1 million. My DNA ain't in that car. I didn't know that car was even up there.
Hey, bye.
I can't help it, but I didn't do it.
You said you didn't see a car, you never heard a car, you never touched a car. Lo and behold, guess whose DNA is inside a dead girl's car? Yours.
Over and over again, you keep telling the police, we didn't touch the car.
I told them, but they didn't believe nothing we told them.
In fact, during that hour-long interrogation, Carver denies seeing Ira or touching her car more than 50 times.
I'm telling the truth.
When the interview finally wraps up, police allow Carver and his cousin Neil Cassida to go home. But Neil's daughter Amy says the writing was on the wall.
He walked in and he was like, they're trying to pin this on me.
Did he tell you what they said to him?
Well, they were saying that they knew he did it. He just needed to confess it.
2 days later, before sunrise, police show up to arrest the men. They haul them back in and give them one last chance to confess.
All right, Neil, we got a few procedural things to do real quick.
This is Neil Cassida.
Y'all barking around the creek. I swear on Mama's grave I didn't have a thing to do with it.
No confession, no matter.
Police charge Mark Carver and Neil Cassida with her murder.
The 2 men are charged with first-degree murder, even though Neil Cassida had already passed a polygraph. The men appear stunned and confused at their arraignment the following day.
Like, everybody was just in shock. We just couldn't believe it was happening.
We do not want to go to trial until we have all the evidence.
The man leading the charge against Carver and Cassida is Gaston County District Attorney Locke Bell. But it is a slow charge, even after the men make bail.
Neil Cassida's family greeted him inside the Gaston County Jail tonight.
No comment, please.
Police continue to test and eliminate 8 other suspects. 2 years pass before prosecutors bring the case to trial. Then, on the eve of the opening arguments in Neil Cassida's case, a shocking development.
It was Sunday morning. The trial started on Monday. He was in the kitchen, and he told my mom that I'm having a little trouble breathing, and he just fell over.
Neil Cassida never gets his day in court.
Neil Cassida died in his Mount Holly home Sunday morning.
Those 2 years was very hard on him. He was so worried that he was going to prison for something he didn't do.
Even with one of the defendants dead, the state pushes forward with the prosecution of the other, Mark Carver, who at the time hires local defense attorney Brent Ratchford. Before the trial, Carver is offered the deal of a lifetime, plead guilty to second-degree murder, and spend just 4 to 8 years in prison. Ratchford thought the deal was a strong statement about the state's weak case.
I'd never gotten such a low offer. He turned it down without batting an eye.
I'm not going to plead guilty for something I didn't do.
You'd rather spend the rest of your life in prison?
Yeah.
Mark Carver walked calmly into court.
In March 2011, Carver's legal reckoning finally arrives.
He's upbeat and feeling good. He's innocent, so we're ready for our day.
At trial, prosecutors build their case on 3 key pieces of evidence. The first, Carver's proximity to the crime scene. If he were less than 100 yards from where Ira was killed, prosecutors argue his claim that he heard nothing that day can't be true. Detectives testify about an experiment they conducted on the river. One detective stood where Carver was fishing, another where Ira was. According to testimony, they spoke in normal voices and could hear each other.
We had a lot of issue with that, but it was allowed to come in anyway.
The second piece of evidence is that touch DNA found on Ira's car that matched Mark Carver. Prosecutors say it proves he touched the car and therefore must have been at the crime scene. And to drive that point home, the state has an ace in the hole. A moment from that interrogation where Carver, police testify, gave himself away.
I believe the words he used was a little thing or a little...
Detective William Terry was also in the room during that interrogation.
He said that she came up to him about right here.
The gotcha moment was when the police detective was recounting the interrogation and said that Mark Carver knew that Ira was little.
That moment is crucial. Carver had always said he had never seen Ira, so prosecutors ask how could he know how tall she was unless he was lying.
The very first thing I thought of was, they got you.
Judge Timothy Kincaid presided over Carver's murder trial.
That's what did it for you?
That was the turning point of that trial for me.
And with that, the prosecution rested its case.
Everyone was then sort of on the edge of their chairs waiting for the defense to present a case.
But to the shock of Carver's family, Ratchford decides the state's case is so weak, he will present no witnesses or evidence for the defense.
They could not explain how the crime occurred. Based on that, the jury's not going to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt.
They told us no way that they were going to be convicted.
They're wrong. It takes the jury just a few hours to return with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder.
When I heard that verdict come down, I couldn't breathe. I was like, oh my God, they got it wrong.
Judge Kincaid sentences Carver to life in prison, but while his cell door slams shut, another investigation is just beginning.
So let's send you over to where Ira was.
How much of the state's case really holds water?
Tell her to yell.
Stay with us.
Gregory F. Taylor is innocent.
Chris Muma gets people out of prison.
Amen.
Her organization, the North Carolina Center on Actual Innocence, has had a hand in overturning 19 convictions.
The point at which I really thought maybe there was something to this case was finding out that Chris Muma was involved.
And I thank you so much.
Muma takes on only 2% of the clients who approach her. In 2013, she agreed to make Mark Carver's fight her own.
You rarely take these. You picked Mark's case. Why?
The bottom line is there a valid question mark, and is there a way to get the answer? Mark's case met all the criteria for us.
And if anyone ever needed a sharp legal mind in his corner, it is Mark Carver. Muma argues he was easily manipulated by police because of his limited education.
Is it hard for you to read and write?
Yeah, I can read a little bit, but I can't write. I'm literate.
You really have to go all the way up the hill.
One of the first problems Muma noticed in the case was that the killers were, she believes, physically incapable of killing.
There's all kinds of things that don't fit together. It doesn't fit together that two men who are so limited in their physical ability could do this to a young, vibrant, strong girl.
Neil had terrible heart condition. His family said he couldn't walk 20 feet without becoming winded. Mark Carver has carpal tunnel in his hands. He says he can't even hold a plate for long without dropping it.
Those years working in a cotton mill had left Carver disabled. He showed us the scars on his arms from multiple surgeries.
So how does that affect what you can do and what you can't do?
I can't grab nothing, hold it for a long time.
Can you button your cuff back up?
Yeah, just take me a minute. I'll get it in a minute. Just have to give me time.
Okay.
Could these hands throttle someone to death? And even if Carver had killed Ira for reasons unknown, why on earth would he stay at the scene?
It doesn't make sense. Who's going to kill someone and then go right back to fishing?
Muma also points to this man who asked us not to reveal his identity. He was on the Catawba River that day and even spoke to Mark Carver around 2 p.m. in that crucial period after Ira was killed and before police questioned Mark Carver.
We talked about fishing and talked about his family. We had a good conversation for about 30, 35 minutes.
But most importantly, this man says he didn't notice anything about Carver that suggested he had just been through a homicidal struggle.
Mr. Carver wasn't muddy, he wasn't wet, he had no scratches on him. He was just as normal as anybody could be normal, just sitting on the back of his SUV fishing.
Muma thinks this man's testimony could have been important at Carver's trial, but he was never called to testify. Instead, the jury heard from that detective who described the sound experiment police conducted on the river, trying to disprove Carver's claim that he heard nothing. We recreated that experiment for ourselves.
So let's send you over to where Ira was.
Okay.
I'm going to stay here where Mark was.
Okay.
And we're going to have you talk.
Remember, on the stand, the detective said he spoke in a normal voice and could still be heard from the fishing hole.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I don't hear anything.
Can you hear me?
Did they do it yet?
Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Tell her to yell.
Can you hear me?
Now I hear her.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you! You cannot hear each other talking at a normal voice. You can't hear each other talking when you raise your voice several levels, and that's what I did with you.
You shouted as loud as you could.
I did shout as loud as I could.
Of course, the jurors never saw an experiment like this. They just heard the detective's testimony about it. And this isn't the only time Muma thinks that the detective's testimony may have misled the jury.
He said that she was, I believe the words he used was a little thing.
Remember that bombshell moment when he described how Carver seemed to know Ira's height, even though he claimed never to have seen her?
He said that she came up to him about right here.
Muma says you need to look at the actual video, which was never played in court, and understand that police were interrogating a man with an IQ of 61 and had no idea what he was up against.
If you look at the full interrogation, the detective was asking Mark to tell him about Ira.
In fact, it is the detective interrogating Mark who calls Ira little and then encourages him to describe her even though he's already said over and over he's never seen her.
She was a little bit like what you. How many other callers? Wasn't real tall. She wasn't that tall to me. I called you about 5'4". So she wasn't much taller than you. No.
It is the detective who's telling Mark. The detective stands up and says, she would have come about here on you, right? And Mark says, yeah, I guess. And he said, well, stand up and show me.
If y'all will stand up, look at each other in the eyes, but if she do look at you in the eyes, yes, I do. Show me, stand up, show me about how tall she was on you.
And Mark basically mimics what the detective did.
Probably about right there. Okay. I guess. And I don't know. Yeah, I understand. Yes. Okay.
Was he being manipulated?
I think it was manipulative to present that at trial without clarification. And I think it was error for the defense to not challenge that.
Again, jurors in the case never saw this video. They just heard the detective describe it. Judge Timothy Kincaid, who presided over the case, also found the detective's trial testimony persuasive, but he'd never seen the tape either.
You never saw the little girl again?
This is the actual interrogation.
Never saw her call. She was a little bit like what you. How many other callers? Wasn't real tall. She wasn't that tall to me.
What do you think after watching that videotape of the interrogation?
I think it was quite leading.
The detective was using the language first, in other words.
He was.
Do you think that Mark Carver was being led by the detectives and is simple enough that he would just echo whatever this man was saying?
I can't answer that. I think it does put a new light on the whole thing.
What kind of light?
It does make me question whether or not Mark Carver did it. Certainly, I think that could have created reasonable doubt.
But what about that final and most damning piece of evidence, the touch DNA that seemed to place Carver at the crime scene?
When you hear the words DNA match, that sounds like as close to a sure thing as you can get.
Muma says not so fast. Whatever you think you know about the infallibility of DNA, think again.
Is there another explanation for how that DNA got there?
Stay with us.
Now 2020 continues. Once again, Elizabeth Vargas.
911, what's the emergency? They found a body floating in Catawba River.
In the hours after Ira Yarmolenko's body was found, local news crews recorded this footage of police processing the scene. It looks like they're all over it, but attorney Chris Muma says looks can be deceiving.
It was actually 2 months later before the vehicle was swabbed.
Why did the police wait 2 months before swabbing that car for DNA?
It seems from the records that people just lost track of who was doing what.
Lost track in a high-profile...
Forensic science. It was that technology that gave detectives here the break they needed. Those traces of Mark Carver's touch DNA on Ira's car.
Mark's DNA was not found on anything else. It was not found on the steering wheel, the key, the ligatures around Miss Yarmolenko's neck, her clothing, the gear shift, a seat, a front door. It was not found on any of those. And they were tested.
What about under Ira's fingernails? Was there any DNA there?
There were two profiles. There was hers, which you would expect to find there, but there also was another profile that was unidentified.
To this day, police have not been able to identify to whom that mystery DNA belongs, or explain why so little of Mark Carver's or Neil Cassidy's DNA was found at the crime scene.
Wouldn't his DNA have been all over Ira? We're talking about a life and death struggle here, a death match.
I would expect to see more of his DNA on her body or on her clothing.
Dr. Lawrence Kobylinski is a DNA expert who has testified in nearly 50 trials.
To be left behind. The simplest explanation is that he did not touch those ligatures.
And if it's possible that Carver didn't touch the ligatures, is it also possible he didn't actually touch the car?
Most people think of DNA only being able to be in a place if they specifically touch it, and they don't consider the fact that someone else may have had contact with them and then touched the car.
There are two ways that DNA can be deposited on an item of evidence. One way is a direct transfer, in which
as in I touch that
as in
item.
I touch something and I leave behind DNA from my hands. The second possibility is an indirect or secondary transfer, where I shake your hand and now I touch a vehicle and I transfer your DNA onto that vehicle.
So how could Carver's DNA have been transferred? Remember, he spoke to police that day on the banks of the river.
The officer who came over and took Mark's driver's license, so he's holding an item that has Mark's DNA on it, and he shook Mark's hand.
And look again at the crime scene photos and video. Muma says it's clear some of the officers were not wearing gloves, even while they were touching the car.
They're touching the inside of the car, they're touching the outside of the car, they're touching the doors, the handles, so it's contaminated.
This officer even appears to lean on the car door. And something else is startling. While reviewing the video shot at the crime scene that day, we came across this footage. It appears to show an officer rubbing the exact area of Ira Yarmolenko's car where Mark Carver's touch DNA was found. And as you can see, he's not wearing gloves.
Were any of the officers who were touching that car, did any of them have their DNA tested?
There's no record of any DNA being taken from any officer who was at the scene.
At Carver's trial, secondary transfer of his touch DNA was dismissed as highly unlikely. But it has happened before. In 2012, a millionaire from California was murdered in his home. Forensic experts found DNA on his fingernails that they were able to link to 26-year-old Lucas Anderson. There was only one problem. Anderson had an airtight alibi. At the time of the murder, he was in the hospital being treated for severe intoxication.
It turns out the same two paramedics that scooped up Anderson, who was living on the streets, were at the murder scene a short time later.
Once prosecutors realized Anderson's DNA had been transferred to the crime scene by paramedics, he was finally cleared.
If you're not careful, you're going to end up putting somebody at a crime scene who was never there.
So why didn't Carver's original defense attorney call a DNA expert to explain how that might have happened here?
Sometimes you're opening Pandora's box. You think you're putting in a lot of good evidence, but it could turn around and bite you. Then a DNA expert is not going to help you.
Ratchford's decisions continue to haunt Mark's family.
Robin, have you spoken to Mark in prison?
We speak to him twice a week and go and visit when we can. He just wants to come home. Just imagine living every day in there knowing you didn't do it.
But if Mark Carver didn't kill Ira Yarmolenko, who did?
Did she travel from Charlotte by herself? Or someone else in that car?
An inmate wrote a letter, said that he had killed Ira Yarmolenko.
The hunt for other suspects, next. Ever since the day 20-year-old Ira Yarmolenko's bright life was cut short, Mark Carver's answers have been the same.
Mark, did you kill Ira?
No.
Did you strangle that young woman?
No. I didn't even see her.
There's some saying about how a lie has a short life, but the truth lives on forever. He's never wavered.
What does that tell you?
It tells me he's telling the truth.
And if Mark Carver is telling the truth, that means a killer is still on the loose. Someone who can solve the puzzle of that crime scene on the Catawba River. Why, for example, were there 3 ligatures around Ira's neck?
It's definitely overkill. The hoodie string was probably enough to cut off the air supply in her neck.
That alone would have killed her.
I think that...
At one point, investigators entertained the theory that Ira knew her killer. Could it have been a fellow student who may have been stalking her? Or a customer from that coffee house where she worked, who some said might have been obsessed with her? Or someone who coerced Ira to let them into her car that day?
The question was presented to me, did she travel from Charlotte by herself? Was there someone else in that car?
Remember, investigators were never able to enhance these surveillance images enough to confirm if Ira was alone or not.
The footage was not good enough quality where someone could tell whether there was another person in the car, either in the front seat, back seat.
Even if Ira was alone, there was no shortage of other suspects in the area who might have committed a crime of opportunity.
There were a lot of construction workers. There was a lot of traffic, a lot of people traffic. Ample opportunity for her to come in contact with someone that was totally unknown to her.
Last, but perhaps most bizarre, a confession that came early in the case.
An inmate in the Mecklenburg County Jail.
The case of a murdered UNC Charlotte student.
Wrote a letter to one of our local news anchors and said that he had killed Ira Yarmolenko.
Police talked to the self-proclaimed killer, even tested his DNA, but determined his confession was just a strange way to meet a local celebrity.
And they believe that he was infatuated with the news anchor and saw this as a way of getting a chance to talk with her.
Was there any sign that he...
Chris Muma says the only way to resolve the questions surrounding Mark Carver's guilt is for the district attorney to release the DNA evidence to be re-examined.
The district attorney in this case has opposed you every step of the way.
He has. He has. And I've asked to sit down with him. I've asked to meet.
As for why should I help you to get somebody off that I firmly believe is guilty?
Prosecutors in this is happening.
There's another way to look at this. If we do believe in secondary transfer, we have to start thinking about secondary transfer of both.
But Carver is adamant his only crime is being a gullible fisherman in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Why do you think police were so focused on you?
Because they just wanted somebody to take the rap for it, and they didn't care who done it.
I think they thought they were easy targets.
Because?
They were uneducated. They wasn't highly sophisticated. They were real simple.
Poor, pretty poor.
Yeah, pretty poor.
As of tonight, there is another powerful voice suggesting Carver's case should get another look. Someone that might surprise you. The trial judge, Timothy Kincaid.
Part of a district attorney's oath is to do justice. And if that's what justice requires, that's what you got to do.
When we come back, what happened just yesterday that could set Mark Carver free? And what Ira's family has to say about it. Stay with us. It's been nearly 6 years since Mark Carver was convicted of Ira Yarmolenko's murder. His original defense attorney stands by his handling of the case, but has been haunted by it ever since.
This is the one trial in 20 years that I have lost sleep over. Mark Carver is innocent. I would love to get a second chance.
A second chance for Mark Carver. That's what Chris Muma hopes she can deliver.
A gruesome crime scene leaves witnesses shocked.
An officer noticed a foot protruding, and then she realized that there was a body in there.
He fell on the ground. It was just horrible. And I start crying thinking about it.
When best friends become secret lovers, families become enemies. A killer hides in plain sight.
We think we know people sometimes, but we don't always.
I could see her knees buckle.
And I said to myself, oh my God.
And that's when she realized that she needed to come clean and tell the truth.
Take a dark journey through a maze of sex, sports cars, secrets, and money.
Did she ever confront you about this? No. She never said anything to you? No. And I said, will we find your DNA in there? And she said, yes.
To expose a jaw-dropping tale of adultery, fraud, and cold-blooded murder.
This is one of the biggest cases I've worked on.
People that have felt safe in that part of town instantly thought, well, could that happen to me?
Something wrong was going on.
Lies upon top of lies.
I think it's kind of sick.
A small secret can become a big secret and can lead to some very bad things.
A secret to die for.
Countrywood is a neighborhood outside the busy part of Memphis.
And it is adjacent to the country club there, the golf course.
It is big homes, pools.
Not a lot of crime there.
Police would tell me it was like Mayberry there compared to the rest of the city.
Countrywood residents Tina and Joe Corona are a big part of this upscale suburban community. And after 15 years of marriage, their life seems ideal.
They were madly in love. I mean, they just couldn't keep their hands off of each other.
If somebody was looking at Tina and Joe from afar, their relationship looked perfect. They had everything that they wanted. They were happy.
Tina is a vivacious and popular member of the community. She's also a successful VP at a top financial firm.
I tell people all the time, she had it. She has whatever it is that people want to be around. She has it.
Tina was involved in the financial world, and she was making a really nice career for herself.
Even though she had not had graduated college with a formal business degree, Tina had a natural ability. My father was in business, my mother was in accounting, and that's all my sister knew growing up.
Tina is not the only one who appreciates her parents' business success. Thanks to her father's mentoring, Tina's husband Joe has gone from selling shoes to running a successful investment firm, Corona Investments.
Tina's father, who had a successful insurance company and sold annuities and things like that, brought Joe in to teach him the business.
So what Joe was doing is he was selling annuities, and these are ways to invest your money, get a good result. They're seen as very safe. It's not like you're playing the stock market or, being risky with your money.
Once Joe was selling insurance and they had a better income, Joe became very confident in himself. And the more things that they were able to buy.
Tina had nice clothes, she had nice jewelry. The Corvettes obviously caught a lot of people's eyes.
The more successful they became, the more vehicles that they did acquire.
The Coronas are a power couple who have a taste for the finer things in life. They share a passion for collecting sports cars and love to race over to their friends at the Memphis Corvette Club.
The Corvette Club was their life, was their personality.
It was a big deal to my sister.
Tina and Joe loved the Memphis social scene. They're often out on the town with another couple, Becky and Bruce Black.
Tina and Joe's friends, Becky and Bruce, they did a lot with them.
They hung out all the time. The wives got along well, the husbands got along well. They were just seen as the best of friends.
Becky and Bruce are more than just Tina and Joe's friends. They're also in business together.
Becky and Bruce did invest with Joe in the Corona Investments.
And they aren't the only investors from Joe's social group.
Generally, his clients came from people they knew together.
That's why he wanted to come to our church, because that would be an opportunity that he could get a lot of people's business.
All the investments people were making were for their retirement.
We heard from different people, we invested our money with Joe. He learned from Mr. Murphy. Everything's good.
Investing with Joe Corona feels like a safe bet. But behind the scenes at Corona Investments, Joe was taking advantage of his clients' good faith. His clientele are mostly friends who don't ask a lot of questions.
People were willing to write over these checks and give money, and they didn't even always ask for paperwork on it. They just trusted him.
It never crossed our minds that Joe would be doing something bad.
Making matters worse, Joe struggles to conceal a nasty and growing habit.
Oh my gosh, he gambled. Joe spent a lot of time at the casinos. He was down there several times a week. Tina used to go down there with him all the time, but over time it became more of a secret that he was going down there.
I do know one Thursday afternoon, he took a trip down to the casinos and he spent a little over $40,000.
Joe absolutely had a gambling problem.
Joe losing thousands of dollars of their hard-earned money isn't the only thing going on behind Tina's back. Tina's lifelong friend has other misgivings.
I believe there were numerous women.
I had people come up to me and say, "Is Tina and Joe still married?" And I'd say, "Yeah, why?"
When whispers of Joe's indiscretions reach the family, they choose to keep their suspicions to themselves in order to protect Tina.
There were never conversations with Tina about Joe. Anything that you said to Tina about Joe, she was going to tell Joe. And that was not something you wanted to happen.
It put us in a very awkward situation. So I let that one slide.
But it's about to become impossible for Tina's family to keep a lid on Joe's secrets.
I'll never forget that day. It was probably about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I had gone by the movie theater to see what was showing, and there they were.
Joe is out in public with another woman.
I caught them together.
Joe's secret is just the tip of the iceberg.
Small secrets can sometimes become bigger secrets, and in this case, it became a deadly secret.
Rumours about Joe Corona's womanising are confirmed by his mother-in-law. And the woman he is seen with is a shocker.
Joe and Becky Black. And when I saw him, it just scared me to death. And they acted like they didn't see me.
Joe works quickly to cover his tracks.
Tina called me that night and she said, "Mom, Joe said that you saw him at the movie theater." And I said, "I did. He was there with Becky." She said, "Yeah, he said that they were meeting Bruce there to go over some insurance." I felt terrible for Tina that he was doing this and lying to her about it.
But Tina believes Joe's excuses. And the Coronas continue to socialise with Becky and her husband. One night, Tina and Joe are out with Bruce and Becky for one of their high-rolling blowouts at the casino. Bruce thinks nothing of dropping a few $1,000s at the blackjack table.
Bruce was the breadwinner in his family. He was very successful, made a lot of money.
Bruce was a fun-loving guy, but he did like to gamble. He liked to drink.
Joe would say, "I love going to the casinos with Bruce because he had the money."
Late into the night, the drinks are flowing freely and Bruce's bets keep getting bigger. Coincidentally, Tina's brother, Scott, and his wife, Sheila, are there that night too.
Joe was not playing, Bruce was playing.
Bruce was very intoxicated and he had stacks of chips.
I guess around $50,000 of chips on the table there.
When Scott and Sheila join the group, they notice something unusual.
Joe did not drink, and normally people that don't drink don't really enjoy being around drunk people. But he did. He could take advantage of friends.
And Joe certainly appears to be taking advantage of Bruce.
Joe was helping him out by counting his chips and taking them, getting them cashed in every so often so nothing happened to his money. Joe said he was doing him a favor.
And we just laughed, thinking, oh, he's going to take care of it for him. He's going to take it.
I think probably Joe was doing a 2-for-1 special.
It looks like Joe was pocketing some of Bruce's winnings.
The chances are high that Joe was skimming some of that money off the top if Bruce was getting any of it back. When we left the casino that night, I just thought, that was the craziest thing I'd ever seen.
Little does Scott know, Joe's reckless behaviour is just getting started. Scott and Joe have office space in the same building, and he's about to get a front row seat to something unfathomable.
Scott came home from work one day and was pretty upset, and I'm asking him what's wrong. And he told me that he had seen Joe and Becky having sex in Joe's office.
The truth is, Joe and Becky have been having an affair for almost a decade. As time passes, they seem less concerned about getting caught.
Joe and Becky were not trying to be discreet at all. They ran around as if they were married.
And back at home, Joe was spending an unusual amount of time on his phone every day.
I believe my sister started having an idea that Joe was up to something.
And Tina asked Joe for the phone bill, and he did not want to give it to her. He did end up giving her a version of the phone bill, but Tina had also contacted the carrier and got the real bill. And when she looked at what Joe gave her compared to what the carrier sent, it was not the same thing. He had done a cut and paste job on the phone bill, and with the real bill, she could see how many times he talked to Becky.
They were talking 16 times a day.
Faced with indisputable evidence, Joe makes a stunning admission about his relationship with Becky.
when Tina confronted Joe, he said, well, yes, but it was more of an emotional relationship. She doesn't mean anything to me. You mean everything to me. You're the love of my life.
Once again, with unwavering belief in Joe and their relationship, Tina falls for his lies.
And Joe told Tina that the affair was over.
Joe promises Tina that he'll work to rebuild their marriage. But then she receives another crushing blow.
My husband died in his sleep, and I was just in a daze.
Family was very important to Tina, and that really rocked her world.
Tina was a daddy's girl. She loved her daddy very much. She was devastated.
As grief and turmoil engulf Clara, Tina and Scott, dangerous deceit, secrets and lies threaten to further rip this family apart. In the days following James Murphy's death, the distraught family bonds together and moves forward as best they can.
It was devastating to the whole family. Clara was more than devastated, and Tina too. All she kept saying was, what am I going to do without my daddy?
In the midst of their grief, Tina's husband Joe steps up.
When my father passed away, Joe jumped right in and said, hey, look, I'm going to help you guys, help your mom.
Joe started telling me how much he loved me, which shocked me. He'd never told me that in his life.
Joe offers to help with the more complex part of the estate, James Murphy's vast car collection.
Tina's father had collected cars.
He had Bentleys, Rolls Royces, 57 Chevrolets, old Corvettes, but he would buy and sell them.
And Joe had said, hey, I'll sell these vehicles, we'll get the money from them, that'll help with things.
I had no reason to doubt that he wouldn't help my mother and do the right thing.
As Joe makes deals to sell the antique cars, Tina has time to reflect and decide she and Joe could use a fresh start in a new home.
Tina had a nice house, but Tina wanted the next house. She said, we deserve almost a show palace of a house. And she figured, we have the money, let's move. Let's do it now. Why should we wait any longer in life?
Joe agrees, but secretly knows there's no way he can come up with the down payment. He controls the household finances.
She'd have to ask him if she could have some money to go shopping.
He controlled every single thing that she did. He decided where they were going to go for dinner. He decided what movie they were going to see, what event they were going to go to.
She couldn't go to a doctor's appointment without him. She couldn't go to a nail appointment without him.
He was the most controlling person I've ever met in my life.
Some people will tell you that Tina wanted someone who was stronger than her in the relationship. Someone to kind of take care of her, to celebrate her and support her, and that's what Joe's personality really lent itself to, at least on the outside. But the question was, what was really happening behind the scenes?
The hard truth is, they are drowning in debt. Joe's gambling away their money, and despite promises to the contrary, his secret relationship with Becky is stronger and more intense than ever.
One minute, she's smiling to Tina. The next minute, she's having an affair with her husband.
It would have been real convenient for Tina to be out of the way for Becky.
Becky wanted Joe. She wanted a life with Joe, and Joe wanted a life with Becky. But I don't know that either one were willing to leave their spouses because it was really convenient. Both their spouses are earning a living for the two of them to play around every day.
When Joe wraps the sale of his father-in-law's vehicles, Clara is eager to find out how much money he's made. But strangely, her bank statements are no longer being delivered in the mail.
All of a sudden, they weren't coming to the house anymore.
And the family thought it was very strange.
Like, this is weird.
When my mother-in-law talked to a neighbor, they indicated they had seen Joe pulling up in the driveway and pulling mail out of the mailbox.
He was checking mail and then putting mail back in there, so he was looking for specific pieces of mail.
Scott and Sheila are convinced Joe's been stealing Clara's bank statements. But that's not even the half of it.
I realized that something wrong was going on. Sheila helped me, and we logged everything that Joe had done.
And went through each car and how much Joe had told her that it was sold for versus how much was actually deposited in the bank.
One of the vehicles was a Bentley. It had 23,000 miles on it, and Joe had ended up selling that car for around $20-something thousand. And I had pulled up paperwork where my father had turned down several $50,000 offers on the vehicle.
Joe had stolen about $30,000. It was Tina's mother.
Turns out Joe has been selling the cars under value to make fast cash for himself.
I couldn't believe it. He's a piece of work.
To do somebody that way when they were grieving made me angry.
Tina's family has had enough. Joe is about to face the music.
Clara called Tina and Joe and said she wanted to have a family meeting about all this money.
I think it was an aha moment for Clara and Scott. They were right about Joe all along.
So when Joe and Tina got there, we said we need to go over everything on the vehicles.
All of the paperwork was presented to Tina and Joe. Joe immediately got nervous. He was sweating profusely.
As accusations fly, Joe angrily denies everything.
That was a very ugly moment in time.
In Joe's mind, he didn't owe my mother any money for the cars that he had sold.
Tina once again defends her husband.
How dare they accuse my husband of stealing money? How can my family treat me this way?
I couldn't understand how Tina could believe everything that Joe was telling her. You've already found him to be a cheater, and now he's a thief. At what point is she going to wake up?
As the family conflict reaches a boiling point, Tina is faced with a heartbreaking decision.
And Joel turns to her and says, "It's me or it's them." And Tina chooses Joe.
Tina got up and said she'd lost her family. I just started bawling, and they left.
Despite clear evidence that Joe is stealing, Tina stands by her husband.
The fact that Tina chose Joe over him and his mom, it was very painful.
It was really hard on me, and I know it was hard on my mother.
Tina's loyalty to Joe comes at a huge cost. This family will never be the same. In the weeks following the Murphy family clash, Tina abandons her family and her world is getting smaller.
She felt like everyone was against her.
And life is no picnic for Joe. His clients are mostly friends who are starting to demand answers about the money they put in his company, Corona Investments.
Joe counted on people not asking questions and really saying, well, it's my friend. He would never do me wrong. I'm sure he's watching out for the best interest of myself, my family, my children's college funds. But what they didn't know was behind the scenes, Joe was not investing their money. Joe was taking their money.
And it's becoming more difficult for Joe to conceal the truth.
People would ask for paperwork. Why haven't I gotten it yet? What was happening with their money? And they felt that Joe was giving them a runaround. Joe didn't like questions. Joe would push you away. And that raised a red flag with people. And it started eventually creating tension.
He was constantly chasing his tail. He just ran in circles, and he was losing control.
Tina is oblivious to Joe's shady business dealings. She's at the top of her career, believes that they're in great financial shape, and wants to move to a posh Memphis neighborhood.
Tina didn't really ask questions about the money.
Tina believed that the house that they currently lived in was paid for, but it had a sizable mortgage on it.
She thinks they're free and clear, and she assumed that they had a lot of money in the bank.
Even with cash buyers for their current house, Joe keeps stalling on the purchase of the new home.
Joe says we got to show this, then he's got to find something else for the mortgage people. I don't know when we're going to close on this house.
Joe knew that when you start getting banks involved and you start having people look into finances to buy that beautiful house that Tina wants, you can't hide things. People are going to find out.
The walls were closing in on him, and eventually something had to give.
Joe's lies and betrayals are starting to catch up with him, and he knows it. The last thing he wants is for Tina to uncover the truth.
There's an indication that Tina was perhaps starting to ask questions.
This house that they were supposed to be buying just kept dragging on, and I think she knew that there was more to all of this and something wasn't right. I think she was on the verge of discovering the truth.
Tina's worries and suspicions are affecting her health, and she reaches a dangerous low point.
I could tell she wasn't herself. She wasn't the bright light in the room. She was very dim.
It's almost like the persona started cracking. Not feeling well, putting weight on.
She said, I just feel fat and ugly. And I said, is Joe doing this to you? She goes, well, I guess when he tells me that he's not physically attracted to me.
And there's more on Tina's mind. Becky Black is still on the scene, and her behaviour is starting to creep Tina out.
Becky wearing the same kind of clothes that Tina wore, wearing the same perfume. It was Joe's favorite perfume.
Her hair, she bleached her hair like Tina.
I think it's kind of sick. I'd never seen her so depressed.
As her melancholy intensifies, Tina searches for something to celebrate. An upcoming dinner party at the Memphis Corvette Club may be just what she needs.
She was president-elect of the club. The club had a lot of activities going on.
And she was tasked with getting things ready for this party.
So Joe said that he had told Tina to take the truck because she was getting party supplies.
While Tina runs errands, Joe has plans to work on one of his classic cars.
He had a souped-up vehicle, and one of his friends from the Corvette Club was going to help him work on it.
By early evening, Tina hasn't arrived at the Corvette Club.
People are calling Joe from the Corvette Club, and they're like, hey, we're trying to get in touch with Tina. We haven't heard from her.
Joe says he doesn't know where she is, but he's worried. She's been gone all day, and he hasn't heard from her.
Joe called me Saturday night and wanted to know if I had seen or heard from Tina. So I checked, and I said, I have no missed calls, no texts, no message, no nothing. I said, what's going on? And he goes, well, she left here this morning, and she's not answering my calls.
Really worried. No one has seen or heard from Tina, and now Joe and her friends are starting to worry.
thought, oh gosh, what has she done? Did she take off? Did the depression get the best of her? What did that little sneaky girl do?
By 6 p.m., Tina Corona is a no-show at the Memphis Corvette Club. Panic is setting in. Her best friend Carrie is determined to find her.
I said, have you called the police? No. Have you called any hospitals? No. I said, I tell you what, you put a search party together and retrack where she was going that day.
So they were supposed to have a big party that night, and instead that party turned into a search party. And they spread out looking for Tina.
When Joe contacts the police, they agree to put out an APB and be on the lookout for the vehicle.
You have all of these people in the Corvette Club looking for Tina, and there are questions of why wouldn't you call the missing person's relatives?
She had apparently been missing since Saturday. Nobody had called me until Sunday afternoon. I spent the majority of Sunday night into Monday morning driving all around Memphis and different areas.
We drove around to the hospital. We were out till after 2 o'clock in the morning looking for her.
It was like looking for a needle in the haystack.
And I kept thinking maybe she got smart and left him.
The weekend search is fruitless. Until the next day. A resident in the nearby town of Bartlett calls police to report a suspicious vehicle has been parked in a dead-end street since Saturday.
The call came in to our dispatch, and they sent patrol units there. And once they got there, they ran the tag of the vehicle, and it came back as the one belonging to the missing individual, Miss Tina Corona. As they started looking at the vehicle, one of the officers looked through the back window and noticed that there was like a lump or something in the back covered with towels. And then as she looked further, that officer noticed a foot protruding in the lower portion of the leg from underneath the towels. And then she realized that there was a body in there.
Police quickly identify the body as Tina Corona.
The truck itself, it looked like it had been ransacked. The glove boxes were open, there was stuff thrown on the floorboards.
Police consider the possibility that Tina is the victim of a carjacking.
I got there and I observed that her shoes were just stacked together side by side. And I thought that odd.
Tina's purse and cell phone are gone, but her expensive jewelry is still there.
If you're going to commit the dirty deed of a murder and carjack somebody's car or rob them, why would you not take $30,000 worth of rings? Because if it was a robbery, that's what you're going to rob her for. Why would you leave it? So that seemed very odd to us. And it kind of struck a chord in the back of our head. There's something else going on here.
Officers are dispatched to deliver the tragic news to Tina's family.
My nerves were shot.
He fell on the ground, throwing up and crying, and it was just horrible. And now we're in protection mode for his mom.
Detectives are eager to speak with Joe about his wife.
What we started learning is that Joe was truly in love with Tina.
They question his whereabouts on the day Tina disappeared. Joe tells them he was at a friend's working on a classic car.
Joe says he drove back to the house and then kind of went on his day as normal.
Police confirm Joe's alibi. Scott and Sheila have a lot to unload about Tina's disappearance, and they are quick to spill everything they know about Joe to the detectives.
We spent several hours with them and told them everything that I knew, unedited.
And then we start getting a different picture of Joe. Joe the manipulator, Joe the guy who's worried about money, who's trying to make the hustle. Tina's brother advised us that Joe had been carrying on an affair with Becky Black for many years. So here you are, you have the husband, he's having an affair with Becky Black, and who's to say that Becky Black didn't have something to do with the disappearance and the murder of Tina? So now she becomes a suspect also. At first, like anybody else who gets caught doing wrong, they don't want to tell you the truth. We told her, we have the car, the Avalanche. We are going to search that Avalanche. We're going to find physical evidence. We're going to find DNA. And I said, okay, well, we find your DNA in there. And I could see her knees buckle. And that's when she realized that she needed to come clean and tell the truth. And she said, yes. And I said, how did your DNA get in there? Then she says, Joe and I had sex in the car. And we're like, okay, now we're getting somewhere.
Becky doesn't stop there. She reveals she's been secretly stashing tens of thousands of dollars in her attic.
So there were secrets happening everywhere. Becky's sleeping with Joe, and she's taking money from her husband and hiding it up in the attic to create an escape fund, as she saw it.
Becky's secrets make her a strong suspect, but police still don't have enough evidence to make an arrest. Meanwhile, the community remains unsettled and people want answers.
There was pressure on police to get this solved, to make an arrest, to make people feel comfortable, feel safe again in their city. And people just were wondering, why hasn't this been solved yet?
Then police receive a call from Tina's best friend, Carrie, who drops a bombshell.
I was literally consumed with her murder. But I was on my way to work one morning, and I was thinking about Joe and Tina, and I said to myself, oh my God, no.
A mountain of lies and deceit is about to come crashing down, and a murderous scheme is revealed. With her best friend's murder occupying her every thought, Carrie Brown's revelation is a game changer in the stalled investigation.
My husband and I have discussed some debt we had. So we decided to make a withdrawal from our annuity to pay that debt off.
And she had asked Joe for that to happen. And Joe kept stonewalling her and wouldn't do it. And finally, it took her up to 3 weeks for it to happen.
And I thought to myself, that money that I got from Joe had Tina's name on it. Now, why would Tina's name be on my annuity? And I said to myself, oh my God.
Carrie calls her bank manager for clarification about the check and is stunned by what she learns.
She said, Carrie, it was a personal check from their checking account. This is fraud. You need to call the police. Like right now.
Carrie learns that Joe never purchased an annuity in her name. Instead, he pocketed the money she gave him.
Now we've got a husband who's cheating on his wife. Now he's cheating his wife's friends out of money. Maybe we need to look at Joe a lot more.
Armed with this new information, police subpoena Joe's bank records. They discover Joe is bilking his clients by depositing most of the money he receives into his own personal accounts. He then forges his clients' monthly investment statements.
Joe is a con artist. He's a scammer.
Joe Corona's shifty business dealings reveal the criminal side of his character and push him to the top of the suspect list in his wife's murder. And Becky Black is dismissed. As the months pass and the investigation rolls on, police acquire a key piece of evidence from a neighbour's home security camera.
We were able to recover the video from his system.
The footage shows the black pickup truck exit the garage on the morning of Tina's disappearance, but doesn't show the driver.
That's the truck that was found with Tina in the back of it dead. I think Joe's driving that truck.
The video also reveals Joe driving back to his garage later that day in one of his classic cars, a car that was not kept at his house.
A half a block from where she was found is a storage facility, and Joe keeps his antique cars at that storage facility.
Cell phone records confirm Joe was near his storage unit that day.
So he was within a 5-minute walking distance from the location that his wife was found to where his antique cars were.
This is the evidence they need.
We've got probable cause to put him in the scene, in the area, in the truck.
At this point, investigators are thinking Joe killed his wife, abandoned her body in his truck, retrieved a car from his storage unit, and rushed to his friends to create an alibi. And when police follow up with the friend, he reveals their meetup was hastily arranged over the phone by Joe.
It was nothing that was set up. It was nothing that was agreed upon. He just called and said, "Hey, I'm on my way over there to work on that car with you."
Joe's fate is sealed. Police finally have enough evidence to piece together the murder. The motive boils down to Joe's financial fraud.
Did she ever confront you about this?
No.
She never said anything to you?
No. If she'd have found that out, she'd have lit into me whatever she found it out.
I think she did lit into you.
When did she do it?
Was it Saturday?
So we're thinking that something happened that morning when Tina was leaving. She found a piece of mail that said something about her finances were not what she thought, and that she confronted Joe about it. Joe's whole life is stealing from her friends. He couldn't let her get away knowing that he was stealing from everybody, and he snaps. We think she was held down and suffocated, which could happen by putting a plastic bag over the head or something of that nature. I believe she never left the house that day.
Joe then drove his wife's body to a dead-end street in the town of Bartlett and abandoned it, staging it to look like a botched robbery. It took 5 months to compile all the evidence that led to Joe Corona's arrest for murder. His conviction and life sentence in 2012 made headlines.
Prosecutors say her husband, Joe, smothered her with a plastic bag because she was about to find out he was a liar, philanderer, and thief.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment.
You know, she had all these people up here who loved her.
Joe never admitted to killing his wife. He did admit to the financial fraud part of it.
In 2013, Joe Corona was sentenced to 7 more years on fraud charges.
His take, more than $788,000.
Joe's deceit and manipulation led directly to Tina's estrangement from her family and her brutal murder. But shortly before her death, she quietly reached out to both her brother and her mother.
They both received an email from her in a way to mend things. And Scott had made her a wind chime for her birthday. And she said that she hoped that she could get the wind chime from him for her new house. And she went into telling him about a new house that she was planning on buying. He never got to give her the wind chime that he had made for her.
She was killed at 44 years old. She had her whole life was ahead of her. I just wish I'd gotten to see her in person before she died.
Tina being gone changed my mother-in-law. Tina being gone changed my husband. They'll never be the same people again. Family gatherings are not the same. That happiness is not there that we once had with her.
She knew I loved her.